Welcome to the deep dive. You know how it works. You send us your information overload and we carve out the essential knowledge. Today we're tackling a tool called Jules. Well, it's pretty fascinating. Our listener, let's call him Alex, sent over a whole stack of documentation, clearly intrigued.
Exactly. Alex wants to get a handle on what Jules actually is, how to get started with it, and what it can really do. So our mission today is basically to pull out those core ideas, the functionalities, straight from the docs Alex provided.
Yeah, and honestly, who isn't looking for ways to make development smoother? We all want to stay on top of new tools and techniques without getting, completely buried in technical manuals. Okay, so let's dive right in. What is Jules? At its heart, what's it trying to do?
Well, the docs describe it as an experimental coding agent. Think of it like an AI assistant, but really focused on coding tasks. The documentation mentions things like fixing bugs, generating documentation, even helping build out new features. Sounds like it aims to lighten the load for developers.
A coding copilot. Okay, that sounds interesting.
Yeah.
But the market's pretty crowded, isn't it?
Mm.
What's the core idea here? What makes Jules different?
One of the first things that really jumps out from the documentation is that it works asynchronously. And that's potentially a big deal for developers. Instead of, being stuck waiting for some long analysis to finish, you can kick off a Jules task and then just switch back to your code or maybe review a PR. It's about maximizing your active time.
Right.
The docs also really highlight its integration with GitHub. That suggests it's built to slot right into how people already work.
Asynchronous,
Yeah.
freeing up developer time.
Mhm.
Okay, I could see that being a huge plus. And GitHub integration, yeah, that makes total sense. So if someone's new to this, how do they actually get started? What's the on-ramp look like?
The docs lay out a pretty clear path. First stop is jules.google.com. From there, it's fairly standard stuff. Sign in with your Google account, accept a privacy notice, just a one-time thing.
Okay, standard sign-in. Got it. What's after that?
The next really crucial step is connecting your GitHub account. Obviously, Jules needs permission to see your code to work on it. The docs explain you click a Connect to GitHub account button, go through the usual GitHub authorization, and importantly, you get to choose. You can grant access to all your repositories or, just specific ones you select.
Good. Granular control.
Yeah. Then you get redirected back to Jules. Sometimes you might need a quick page refresh, the docs mention, but usually it's automatic.
Okay, so you're in, GitHub's linked. Are you ready to go then? Ready to start a task?
Almost. Once you're connected, you'll see what they call the repo selector.
But
That's where you pinpoint the exact repository you want Jules to work in. And right next to that, there's a prompt box. That's where you tell Jules what you actually need it to do, like giving instructions.
repo selected, prompt box ready. How do you actually kick off that first task?
So it involves a few clicks. First, like we said, pick the repository. Then you choose the specific branch you want it to work on. The docs point out it pre-selects your default branch, which is handy, saves a click if that's what you want. Then comes the really important bit, writing a clear and specific prompt.
Okay. This sounds like where the magic or maybe the frustration happens. What makes a good prompt?
Yeah, the documentation gives some really good examples. Things like add a loading spinner while fetch user profile runs, or fix the 500 error while submitting the feedback form. Even something like document the use cache hook with JSDoc. That's, a standard for JavaScript docs.
Yeah.
The key thing is precision. You're telling it exactly what to do and where.
And what about bad prompts? What should you avoid?
Right. They also warn against prompts that are just too vague. Stuff like fix everything or optimize code or just make this better.
Yeah, I can see how that wouldn't work.
Exactly. They lack direction. It really hammers home that the more specific you are, the better the results are likely to be.
Got it. Specificity is key. Anything else when you first set up a task?
Yeah, there's an option to add environment setup scripts. We can dig into that a bit more later. And then the final step to get things rolling is clicking the Give Me a Plan button. This seems like a great feature, actually. Jules first outlines how it plans to tackle your request. And you get to review and approve that plan before it touches any code.
Oh, okay. Give me a plan. I like the sound of that. As a developer, yeah, the idea of AI just changing code without me seeing the roadmap first, that would make me nervous.
Totally. It adds a layer of control, of transparency.
The docs also mention notifications. Why enable those?
Well, because it works asynchronously, right? You don't need to sit there watching it. So enabling browser notifications means you get an alert when the task is done, or maybe if Jules runs into something and needs your input. The docs say you can opt in during setup or manage it later in settings. Keeps you in the loop without having to babysit it.
All right, so you kick it off, go do something else, and it tells you when it needs you or when it's finished. Makes sense. Now, let's talk about this environment setup you mentioned. Why does Jules need its own environment?
So the documentation explains that every task Jules runs happens inside a secure, temporary virtual machine, a short-lived VM. This creates a totally isolated sandbox. It can clone your code, install dependencies, run tests, whatever it needs, without any risk of messing with your local setup or other tasks. It keeps everything clean and separate.
Okay, isolation. What tools are already in these VMs? What's pre-installed?
The docs list a pretty solid base. Ubuntu Linux, Node.js, Python, Go, Java, and Rust, common stuff. And interestingly, it says you can actually check the versions yourself. You can add commands like no-v to a setup script and use a run to validate button to see the output. Handy for making sure the environment matches what you expect.
Huh, okay. So what if your project needs something else? Something beyond those defaults?
That's where the setup scripts come in. The docs point you to the repository configuration area. There's an initial setup window where you can just type in terminal commands. The examples they give are things like npm install or npm run test, basically whatever you'd normally run to get your project ready.
And this run to validate button sounds pretty crucial for getting that script right. How does that work?
Yeah, it lets you test your setup script in Jules' environment before you rely on it for a real task. The docs give some good tips for using it effectively. Like, always include commands to install dependencies and run your tests or linters in the script. They also stress using that validate button early and often while you're writing the script. And keep the scripts fast if you can, because Jules spins up a fresh VM every single time. You want to catch setup problems quickly.
Makes perfect sense. Iron out the setup kinks up front. Okay, let's go back to actually running a task. We've talked about selecting the repo, writing that killer prompt. What happens after you hit give me a plan?
Right, so just to recap, by then you've picked your repo, picked the branch using the selector, and the docs remind us Jules remembers the last repo you used, which is convenient. And yeah, we can't say it enough. Clear, specific prompt. Those good, bad examples are really useful guides.
Okay, prompts in, plan requested. What does the user actually see while Jules is thinking or working?
Once you approve the plan and Jules starts executing, the documentation talks about an activity feed. This gives you a kind of real-time view of its progress. You see steps getting completed. And importantly, right there in the feed, you get inline explanations of what Jules is doing, why it's making certain changes. You also see little mini diff previews for each file it modifies.
Many diffs.
Yeah, like small snippets showing the changes. But if you want the full picture, there's a full diff editor too that shows you everything that changed across all the files involved. It's designed to keep you informed throughout.
So you get both the high-level steps and the low-level code changes. What about when it finishes? What's the final output?
When the task is complete, Jules gives you a final summary. This lists all the files it changed, tells you the total runtime for the task, and gives you a breakdown of lines added, changed, or removed, metrics. And critically, it then gives you the option to create a brand new branch in your repo with a commit message already drafted containing all those changes.
Okay, creates a new branch. What about ownership? Who gets credit for that commit?
Good question. The docs clarify that you still own the branch, but Jules is listed as the author of the commit itself.
Oh.
Makes it clear where the code came from. And from that branch, you can then easily open a pull request in GitHub, start the review process, merge it in.
What if while you're watching this activity feed, you see something off, or you wanted to do something slightly differently? Can you nudge it?
Absolutely. The docs really emphasize this interactive part. There's a chat box right there in the interface. You can use it to give feedback in real time. Ask Jules to change its approach, maybe revise some code it generated, or just clarify why it did something. It sounds like it's designed to be responsive. It might even adjust its plan or redo steps based on your chat messages. It's meant to be a conversation.
That's pretty cool, a dynamic back and forth.
Yeah.
What if you need to pause things, like you get pulled into a meeting or just need to step away?
Yep, you can pause it, and there's a clear pause button. While it's paused, Jules just stops working. It waits until you either give it new instructions via chat, explicitly hit unpause, or, well, delete the task altogether. Gives you full control.
Okay, let's circle back to that initial plan it generates. You hit, give me a plan. What does that plan actually look like? How detailed is it?
Right, so before writing any code, it lays out its strategy. The docs say this plan includes a few things. A description in plain English of what it's trying to achieve, a step-by-step breakdown of the actions it intends to take, and any assumptions it's making or maybe setup steps it thinks it needs. You can click to expand each step for more detail.
And this is your chance to steer it before it starts coding. You give feedback on the plan itself.
Exactly. That same chat input box is used here. You can comment directly on the plan, maybe ask it to rethink a step, point out something it missed, clarify your original request if the plan seems off. Or sometimes Jules might ask you a question in the plan and you answer it there. It's a collaborative planning phase. It'll revise the plan based on your feedback.
So it's not just take it or leave it. You shape the plan together. What if you submit the prompt, get the plan, but then, life happens, you get distracted. Does the task just sit there waiting forever?
No. The documentation mentions an auto-approve timer. If you navigate away or just don't interact with the plan for a set amount of time, Jules will eventually approve it automatically and proceed. It's designed to stop tasks getting stuck indefinitely if you're just temporarily unavailable.
Okay, that makes sense. So plan approved. Jules starts coding. How are you reviewing those code changes as they happen?
So as it works through the plan, that activity feed we talked about keeps updating in real time. The docs say it logs each step, describes what it did, shows any output or errors, and it'll even prompt you right there if it needs more information to continue. It gives you a running commentary.
And the code itself, seeing the actual diffs.
Yeah, you get those mini diffs we mentioned right in the feed, linked to the step that made the change, quick glance. But for the detailed view, there's that full screen diff editor in the right-hand pane. It shows all the modified files, any new files it created, highlighting the changes. Crucially, it only shows files Jules actually touched. Keeps it focused.
Got it. Mini diffs for quick checks. Full diff editor for deep dives. And just like with the plan, you can jump in with feedback on the code itself.
Yes, absolutely. That chat box is still your main tool for interaction during execution. You can ask it to, say, refactor a function, stick to certain style guidelines, add more tests for the code it just wrote, clean things up, fix a mistake you spotted. It's an ongoing conversation to get the code looking the way you want it.
And then, once it's all done, we get that summary again.
Yep, the final task summary pops up, reminds you what files changed, how long it took, the lines of code stats, and it reminds you of the branch name it's ready to create and the suggested commit message.
And pushing that to GitHub, how does that final step work?
You click the Create Branch button. Jules then pushes the code to that new branch in your actual GitHub repo. And like we said, Jules is the commit author, preserving that history. If you then decide to open a PR from that branch, you are the author of the pull request itself. Once that branch exists on GitHub, you can treat it like any other branch. Edit it further yourself, send it for review via PR, or just delete it if you didn't like the results.
Right. Okay, we've walked through a single task pretty thoroughly. What about managing multiple tasks or working across different projects? How do you start new ones?
The docs mention 3 main ways to kick off a new task. You can click the main Jules icon to go back to the home screen for a fresh start. There's also a big New button in the top navigation bar. Or if you're already looking at a specific repository in the repo view, there's a New Task button right there. And it's worth remembering, each task runs in its own totally separate VM. No interference.
And pausing, we covered. What about just stopping a task completely, getting rid of it?
Yep. For pausing, you use the pause button. If you want to delete it permanently, the docs say you hover over the task in the repository view and a little trash can icon appears.
Yeah.
Click that and it's gone. Paused tasks can be resumed, but deleted ones are permanently removed.
Okay. And how does Jules handle access across potentially lots of different GitHub repositories?
It only ever gets access to the specific repos you explicitly allow through that GitHub connection process. The documentation does hint that maybe, down the line, they might support other version control systems, but right now, it's GitHub only. Ensures you're always in control of what code it can see.
So you have to grant access repo by repo or give it access to all. How do you add a new repo that it doesn't have access to yet when you're starting a task?
When you start a task, there's that drop-down menu showing repos Jules can already access. You can also enroll new ones from a sidebar list or search using the repo selector. If the repo you want isn't there, you need to grant access. You can do that through your main GitHub settings, profile settings, applications, Google Labs, Jules, configure repository access.
Okay, the standard GitHub app setting.
Yeah, but conveniently, the docs also say you can do it right from within Jules. The repo selector has a cut plus add repository option that likely streamlines that GitHub permission flow.
That's handy. Good to have options.
Yeah.
The documentation also mentioned a repo view. What's that about?
Yeah, the repo view sounds like a dedicated space just for working within one specific repository. Keeps things focused. The docs mention some upcoming features for it, like something called codecasts.
Codecasts, like podcasts for code.
Sort of. described as short audio summaries of recent activity in the repo, almost like an audio changelog. You can apparently click Generate Today's Codecast now, but they note it's still evolving and currently summarizes all recent commits, not just Jules' work. An interesting idea, though.
Huh. Yeah, audio summaries could be useful. How do you actually get to this repo view?
Two main ways mentioned in the docs. You can click on any repository name you see in the task list in the sidebar. Or, after you've started a task and picked a repo, you can then click that repo's name to jump into its dedicated view.
And what do you see once you're in the repo view?
It organizes all the Jules tasks related to that specific project. Running tasks are shown right at the top. Below that, you'll see lists of completed tasks, failed ones, or tasks that are waiting for your input. Each task is clickable, so you can easily go back and review its history, the diffs, the chat log, everything.
Okay.
And you can also start a new task right from there using the New Tasks button. The docs note that doing it this way automatically pre-selects that repo and the branch you were viewing, which saves a couple of steps.
All right, this has been a really comprehensive look at Jules, all based on that documentation Alex sent. Let's try and wrap it up. What are the main takeaways here?
Okay, so in a nutshell, Jules is positioned as this experimental AI coding assistant. Its goal is to help with common dev tasks, bug fixing, docs, features. Key things that stand out are its asynchronous nature, so it doesn't block you, and that tight GitHub integration. Getting started is pretty standard. Account setup, connect GitHub, choose your repo. The crucial part is writing those clear, specific prompts. And you have control setting up the environment with scripts, reviewing the plan before code is written, monitoring progress via the activity feed and diffs, and giving feedback interactively through chat.
And managing tasks seems straightforward. Pausing, deleting, controlling repo access with that focused repo view for specific projects.
Exactly. It's an interactive, controlled process, according to these docs.
Yeah, this deep dive should give Alex and anyone else listening a really solid grounding in how Jules works, or at least how it's presented in his documentation.
And it does make you think, doesn't it? Consider how an asynchronous AI assistant like this could fit into your own development workflow. What kinds of tasks, maybe the tedious ones, the repetitive ones, could you potentially hand off to something like Jules, freeing you up for more complex problem solving?
Definitely food for thought. How could it change your day-to-day? And of course, if you, like Alex, want to go even deeper or try Jules out, that original documentation probably has more details. Look for sections like what's next or more resources. That would be the place to go. Thanks for taking this deep dive with